What was the takeaway for you from the Prime Minister's closing news conference this morning in Charlottetown?
It's a delicate balancing act for Mr. Trudeau because he's been there for 8 years. So, Marcia, every time he talks about an issue like housing, which is top of mind, as that poll just showed, he tries to do two things. Tries to reassure people that they understand the issue and that they've been on it. But every time Mr. Trudeau says something, and he repeated it several times, oh, we're going to continue doing what we've been doing, because he's trying to say that they've been doing something on housing. The average Canadian who is concerned says, but we want you to do something different because what you've been doing hasn't worked. And that's where it's becoming tricky for him. My main takeaway, though, is that Trudeau's starting to prepare his lines for the next campaign. We attended the beta version of Justin Trudeau's stump speech for the next campaign. Well, the question is all about leadership. When times are tough and inflation is, really eating away at people's paychecks, do you try to make them even more angry, or do you try to rise up above it? I don't think that that's a winning formula right now. I've always been very skeptical of Poilievre's approach. Everything's broken and everything's Trudeau's fault. I don't think that that completely works. But what's happening now, Marcia, is that Poilievre is starting to really reach into some of the base vote of the Liberals and of Trudeau. He's talking to 18 to 25-year-olds and saying, not only are you finishing university with massive debt, but you're never going to be able to buy a house, something that Canadians have taken for granted for generations. In clear terms, you're going to be poorer than your parents or your grandparents. That's starting to hit home. And that's why his numbers are starting to climb up. Trudeau knows that. He's a really experienced politician, but he's running out of buttons to hit. And he's lots of red flashing lights on his dashboard. He doesn't know what to do. And we're starting to see two phenomena take place. One is there are people in his caucus who are talking on background. They're not named, but to mainstream media, serious journalists talking to them individually. They're unhappy. And that's new. Trudeau very, very rarely had to deal with any type of reaction from his caucus. The other one we saw live yesterday over Chrystia Freeland's right shoulder. We had Anita Anand, who kept trying to get in to the answers that she was giving. And unexpectedly, and frankly out of character, Chrystia Freeland more or less snapped and said, yeah, I'm going to finish here first, Anita, in front of the cameras. So if in cabinet, two people who don't hide their leadership aspirations are already starting to bicker like that in front of all Canadians, I don't think it augurs very well for the next few months for Mr. Trudeau, frankly.
Interesting observation. Tom, I want to ask you about perception and reality. This new Leger survey says that 40% of Canadians are blaming the federal government for the housing crisis in this country. Other people will say it's the municipal government, it's the province. Does it matter for Trudeau who is to blame, and I'm saying that with air quotes around it, if people perceive that it's up to the feds?
Well, Mr. Trudeau, one of the buttons he tried to hit on his dashboard, you might recall, Marcia, I'm sure you do, a few weeks ago, he's in Hamilton, and totally unforced error, says into the microphone, well, housing really isn't that much of a federal responsibility. Well, hold on. You got elected in 2015 promising to do something about housing. So how is it all of a sudden it's not your responsibility? So that was a really surprising change of tone and of approach from the Liberals. The federal government has, and Trudeau said it in his speech today, go back to the end of the Second World War. So, the GIs coming back. You built whole communities that are still there today. We ramped up very quickly. The feds were behind that. What was then the Central Mortgage and Housing, today Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, has always played a major, key, leading role across the country, and Trudeau was trying to duck that responsibility. We've also got to be super careful, and Trudeau, I think he's starting to twig to the fact that this might be an angle for him. He steered away from discussing directly, because now that the RCMP is looking at whether or not to go full-fledged investigation into Doug Ford's shenanigans around the Greenbelt, obviously, Trudeau didn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. But he is smart, and he's able to zero in on one thing. What Doug Ford is doing, trying to push away protections for precious wetlands and fauna and all of the things that were protected by the Greenbelt, in trying to remove those protections, he's essentially doing what Poilievre is promising to do, promising to get rid of what he always calls the gatekeepers. So the gatekeepers are people who do environmental assessments to try to protect agricultural land and so forth. So Trudeau's looking at that and saying, okay, this is an angle for us to take care of as well, because if what Poilievre is promising is to stick his nose in provincial protections of wetlands and precious habitat, then maybe that's an opportunity for Trudeau to play the environmental button at the same time as saying we will work with other levels of government to try to come up with the best solutions to ramp up housing. But again, the anchor that's still dragging him down is the fact that he's been there for 8 years, and we are indeed living this crisis because of inaction and failure to put a plan in place by the federal government and to do everything that he says he's going to do now. But saying you're going to do it after 8 years, it doesn't wash. And that's why Poilievre is pulling ahead in the polls.
Right. And there was nothing clear that came out on the issue of housing from the retreat. What
No.
was clear, and I want to get your take on this, is this idea of capping student visas. Quebec, where you are, already pushing back, saying, no, we're not going to do that. What do you make of the strategy around that? What did you think about the fact that they mentioned it as a possible idea, but didn't say it was a for sure?
Well, I think that Mark Miller, the immigration minister, came pretty darn close to saying it's for sure yesterday. He said, no, we've got to do this. And I think it was a wake-up call for Trudeau to have the Quebec government lecture him on this, saying, no, we want those foreign students coming here and they help contribute to our society and we want to have those visas go through. But it's an avowal of failure. It's an admission that things aren't working. And it's, again, trying to pound on anything that you can find to say, well, we'll stop students from coming in from the outside and then there'll be more housing. If you go to places like London, Ontario, you realize that a lot of developers have twigged to this. They buy houses, they turn them into student housing, they make a bunch more money. And this is what's been happening, but nobody's been minding the store. There's never been a plan. And it's always so delicate, Marcia, politically in Canada. The Liberals have always been great at controlling almost all the seats in the Greater Toronto Area, 50 seats in that Greater Toronto Area. That's what decides elections in this country. Forget about everything else. And Trudeau knows that the vast numbers of new Canadians, the cultural communities that are there, they've always been beholden to the Liberals. They've been his stock and trade. But right now, what he's seeing is that the failure to have any sort of plan around immigration isn't an excuse in and of itself just by saying, well, we want to be a more open country. It's a discussion that has to take place, and you don't have to be anti-immigrant to say, hold on. You can't just say we're going to bring in 1 million people a year. We brought in 1 million new Canadians last year. That's great for openness, and ultimately it'll be good for our economy. But short term, it requires a modicum of planning on housing, access to health and social services, education, all the things that governments have to do for all Canadians, including people who have just arrived. So Trudeau's going to try to play the game saying, oh, well, Poilievre's closed-minded. He doesn't want to open up the door, try to talk to that part of his base. But those new Canadians and their kids are also saying, but we'd like to be part of this country. We noticed that you have housing here. Everybody has always had that. How come there's none left for us? I think that Trudeau's going to have to find a better answer than simply saying, oh, you're closed-minded and I'm open-minded. And he's got to come up with, as you say, concrete solutions, Marcia.
So I'm out of time, but I just want to squeeze this in. If you can be short, please. So popular or unpopular politically for the Liberals to take this position about putting the cap on foreign students?
Unpopular.
Unpopular.
Canadians are open. It's an attempt to be populist, uncharacteristic for Trudeau, and that's why it was being pushed back by, of all provinces, the Quebec government. So it does come as a surprise to them. And Trudeau tried to smile his way through it today, but he knows that hurt him, no question.